Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm glad to see that so many of you are interested in this topic about our children have so many worries and fears, working with individuals with anxiety. And hopefully all of you had a chance to download the PowerPoint presentation that accompanies this. And on one of the slides, you saw the little girl and she had her head down on her desk and said, "Oh, I just have too many emails." All of us are overloaded right now. So we really have a sense of what children are doing and what they're feeling when they're anxious about something. So let's talk about some of the things that individuals with anxiety tell us. Thoughts in our heads differ from how we look to other people. A tiny little task may feel overwhelming, and the child might engage in a fight or flight reaction, and you're trying to figure out why they did that, because it was just the smallest thing that might have set them off. And they can't break their tiny habits of worry and fear. If they could, they would, and their anxiety is always there. And one of the most difficult things for people to understand about anxiety is that it's invisible. People can't see it. And when they can't see it, they don't always understand what's going on inside that child's head. The child may leave social settings without warning. And children with anxiety just don't know how to tell themselves that it's okay. So I call now what is happening as we were seeing before the coronavirus, the fact that children with anxiety were an increasing population of children because of all of the demands that are faced on them and the worries that they have. Well, now we have what I call the snowball effect of the coronavirus anxiety. It's like the snowball is going down the hill and it's getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And the child knows something wrong and they just can't stop the snowball from going down the hill. And so as a result, because of all of the changes in routine and schedule, what is happening that children as well as adults are feeling disoriented, distracted, and disorganized. And oftentimes they just don't know why, but it's because we've had a significant change in our routine and people are worried about their health. What happens to children and adults with anxiety for and during the virus is one of the things that is difficult for anyone with anxiety is they don't have what we call cognitive flexibility. In other words, they have difficulty from switching from one task to another, and that has gotten worse. They also have difficulty processing auditory information. So we're trying to tell them things, but they appear to just not be listening. And it really isn't that they're not listening, it's that they can't process the information we're giving to them. And then we see their ability to emotionally regulate, to check themselves, to learn what their triggers are. It just gets worse. And so the ability to do those things goes down, as does executive function skills. Thinking I have something to do and how do I go about getting it, that task, and I need to start on that task. At the same time, all of those abilities to do these things and to cope are going down. Fears and worries are going up. And it becomes a fight, flight, or freeze. And then our children start, as adults as well, catastrophizing, meaning, oh my gosh, I didn't get my work done. I'm going to get an F. I'm never going to pass. I'm going to be retained in this grade. And it just goes on and on. And try as they may, they can't stop that catastrophizing. They need help from us to be able to do it. Some of the children might withdraw even more than they have withdrawn before. And some children with anxiety respond with what we know as oppositional defiant behaviors. They become very defiant. We think they are being obstinate when in fact underlying that is the anxiety that they're facing. So in your handouts, I've given you a number of alternatives to ask children how they are. Try to be more specific, because children, when we say, how are you? They don't really know what to say. They're searching, and we need to be more specific. So today in our time, we're going to talk about 5 key facts about anxiety, 5 characteristics that individuals with anxiety may face. And the most important thing is we're going to talk about a number of strategies that we can use to work with children with anxiety. Anxiety is, in fact, the most prevalent mental health disorder among children. Think about this. 25% of children between 13 and 18 have it. That's a fairly large number. We also know, looking at children who have anxiety, is it going to impact their learning? Absolutely, it impacts their learning. It's going to impact their learning in reading, and we often hear about the children who have math anxiety, and that's very real for a number of children. We typically, with children, use rewards and consequences, but rewards and consequences may not work with these children. Instead, the best approaches are to prevent anxiety triggers, and at the same time we're working to prevent anxiety triggers, we need to also be teaching children how to be able to identify their own anxiety triggers so that they can do that. And we need to be very careful about ignoring children with anxiety, because we may be conveying the message that we don't want to convey, which is the teacher doesn't care. We know that anxiety disorders are the earliest forms of psychopathology to emerge. And we also know at the same time, 50% of all mental illness begins by age 14. We're also seeing it much younger. Here is the really bothersome piece, and it's that the average time between the onset of symptoms of anxiety and treatment is 8 to 10 years. So we know children who have anxiety at very early ages, but we let it go. Maybe because we just don't know what to do, or maybe we as the adults are in denial that the child may have anxiety. But the longer we allow it to go on, the harder it is to treat. And then we know a lot more than we've known before about something known as comorbidity, meaning something looks like something else, but children have, for instance, they may have anxiety and ADHD. They may have obsessive compulsive disorder and anxiety. And they may have oppositional defiant disorder and anxiety. But which children do you think get referred to first? Probably the children with oppositional defiant disorder, because they're causing a lot of issues for people. So, but only 25% have anxiety as a referral symptoms. So anxiety may be the underlying, problem here, but it's presenting itself as ODD as part of this whole comorbid thing. Picture this. So you have a child with ADHD in a classroom, and the teacher is lecturing. And the child's mind wanders because they have ADHD and they have difficulty paying attention, rightfully so. Oh, then lo and behold, the child kind of tunes back in after they have been tuning out. They tune in and they realize, oh no, I haven't been paying attention. What if the teacher calls on me? What am I going to do? What am I going to say? And so therefore, then we have anxiety. And then lo and behold, the teacher calls on us. And we say, well, gosh, I don't know the answer, so I'll become oppositional. Because I'd rather become oppositional, I'd rather refuse to do something than let the teacher know I wasn't paying attention. So our children with anxiety have a lot of what I call cover-up behaviors, if you will. And we have to remember, all of us have anxiety. All of our children have anxiety at some time or another, particularly if something stressful is going on in their lives. But anxiety is on a continuum. So you might have periodic anxious thoughts, and then it goes all the way to anxiety disorder. So it's all on a continuum. So you say, well, when does anxiety become a disorder? When it's interfering with life functioning. They can't go to school, they can't get out of bed, whatever. When it goes beyond what's developmentally appropriate, particularly young children, if you place them in a new setting, are they going to exhibit some sense of fear? Of course and then when it lasts 6 months. And the most common anxiety disorder we know is a specific phobia, a fear of heights, a fear of water, a fear of animals, a fear of, I was working with a parent one time who did not go out of her house because she was so afraid of people in general. We could communicate over the telephone, but she did not go out of her house. Or separation anxiety, and sometimes we see that with young children, or a social phobia. What we know is that children who have anxiety have slow processing speed. And the reason for that is, if you stop and think, if you're worried about something, are you really paying attention to what someone is saying to you? So there are a lot of things, a lot of worries that are going on in the child's head, and therefore we ask them to do something, and we don't give them enough time to do it. They can't do it because their processing speed is low. So what do we need to do for children who have trouble with their auditory processing speed? And if you think about, have you ever requested that a child do something and they just stand there and they just look at you? And a lot of people misinterpret that as, well, obviously they weren't paying attention, or obviously they don't want to do what I want them to do. And that may not be the case at all. They may just need the extra time to process the information. That's why it's very important for us to not tell them to hurry up. If they could hurry up, they would. We have to be aware also of our own processing speed, because sometimes, we get caught up and we talk faster, and then the children who have trouble with auditory processing just don't get it at all. We have to acknowledge the child's anxiety, teach them how to give them a better awareness of time, because we do have to teach children time management, build in extra time, teach the child how to ask for extra time, and one direction at a time. Now, I work with a number of folks who work with high school students, and they say, well, by golly, by the time they're in high school, they ought to be able to follow multiple step directions. I said, well, do the children that follow your directions? No. Maybe you need to go back to one direction at a time. You also have to check your vocabulary usage, because if you're trying to use words that are not in the child's vocabulary, they're gonna focus on that word and think, I don't know what that word means. And so make sure that they understand the terminology that you're using. I was working in a classroom one time, and the children were preparing to take this test. And typically the teacher had told the students to put a circle around the right answer. And then the directions on this test said, put a ring around the right answer. Didn't understand, put a ring around the answer. So just really be cautious of all of our vocabulary words that we're using, because if you're in a fear state, you're not capable of learning. And what we want is children in schools to be in safe relationships and together with the adult, working with them, co-regulating with them. And one of the other things that we need to do is identify potential triggers for anxiety. We generally know some of the triggers for some of our children. However, I will tell you, we don't always know all of the triggers. I was working with a little girl, and it was her birthday, and they were having a little get together in the classroom, and they had balloons. And when the little girl saw balloons, she literally had a meltdown. And we're trying to figure out, why is she having a meltdown? You know, a lot of children like balloons. Well, and you know, when we're in education, we all become really good detectives. And we said, okay, now we need to find out what is, you know, obviously a balloon was a trigger for her, but what's the reason the balloon was a trigger? Well, the balloon was a trigger because her mother controlled her behavior by blowing up balloons. And when the little girl would act up, she would take a pin into the little girl's face on the balloon and burst the balloon. So that little girl heard that. It was very tough. So, oh, good. I see the slides are up now. So again, uh, I am to slide 29. Okay, that's fine. That's fine. So anyway, some key points. Understand that anxiety is real and recognize it. Help the individual with their emotional regulation by co-regulating with them. That's why we're going to talk about some deep breathing activities, etc. Understand that cognitive flexibility is tough for them, and avoid putting pressure on someone. Engage in active listening. Also avoid telling them to calm down. They don't know how to calm down, which is why we have to co-regulate with them. And then the last one is avoid response cost. And what is response cost? Because we've all used it in the field of education, but response cost is about taking privileges away from children or taking things away that they may have gotten. So let's say they were on a point system and we take points away. That's going to rev up children's anxiety even more. Things like red light, yellow light, green light also rev up children's anxiety because they're thinking, oh my gosh, am I on the yellow light? Am I on the yellow light? And then they fixate on that. And then unbeknownst to you, it's caused a lot of anxiety for them. So let's do a 2 truths and a lie. Let's see if that will come up. Okay, here we go. All righty, thank you. All right, one of them is about 50% of the causes of anxiety disorders can be genetically linked. One is conformational bias is relevant to the onset of anxiety disorder. And the third one is difficult temperament at the age, and I can't see the bottom of that slide, but I believe it says at the age of 1 year. So what do you think is the answer to that? Which one? So 2 of these are truths and 1 of them is a lie. Which one is the lie? And the lie is number 3, and because difficult temperament at the age of 5 months was a strong predictor of depression and anxiety symptoms. Think about that. babies who have difficult temperaments, that may very well be now, maybe something else is going on with that baby. That baby may be in a lot of pain, but think about, so difficult temperament at the age of as young as 5 months is a strong predictor of depression and anxiety, and would say to us, we need to begin looking at what's going on with that child. So watch for trigger words that can provoke anxiety. And we know those because some of them provoke our anxiety, or let me tell you, they do mine. Test. Many children don't like the thought of a test. Homework. Get it all done. That really, I wish we could just ban that, because it's very problematic. Because if somebody tells you, okay, you got this, this, and this to do, get it all done. Most of us that we hope are doing pretty well in life will say, oh my gosh, I'm going to start engaging in avoidance behavior. So, or the next one, hurry up, which again, if someone is anxious and you tell them to hurry up, they're trying as good as they can. So you've just created more issues for them. Think about important to identify the catastrophizing thoughts and catch them. And remember, when anxiety increases, working memory and efficiency decrease. And then, there becomes just this overwhelming sense of, I'm never going to be able to do this. I give you an example of a young lady that I worked with who was getting ready to take her teaching license test. Very delightful young lady, but the thought of test, she had some real serious anxiety issues, and we had arranged for her to get accommodations on the test, etc. However, she was so the day she took her teacher licensing test, she spelled her own name wrong. Now, obviously, she knew how to spell her name, but her anxiety had just taken over, and therefore she couldn't even spell her name. Co-regulating is also very important. We teach and coach identification of solutions to problems, and teachers have to model how we do that. We have to make sure that we're coaching children on task completion and giving them, breaking down task completion into very small steps, and model, prompt, and reinforce self-calming strategy, taking a deep breath, 5-finger breathing. There are just a number of those activities that are out there for us to teach, and we do need to, it's one of the things, like a lot of adults, me included, have done yoga to calm ourselves. Well, now we have a lot of mindfulness kinds of activities in schools to teach children to calm themselves, because remember, I always say that children just don't come to school knowing how to behave and knowing how to control their emotions. We have to teach them how to do that. And for those people who say we don't have time to do that because we have to do all of the academics, you don't have time not to. We have to work with our children to teach them all kinds of strategies for emotional regulations. So, and make sure that we're providing external structure for calming down, like having a space that's a calm down area, letting children use fidgets, just all of those kinds of things that are security blankets for children. And again, we've talked about the co-regulating, like the teacher actually saying, okay, we're going to be doing this. Let's make sure we all take a deep breath and modeling it and being supportive of the student. There's a wonderful little book out, and it's called The Four Pebbles. And the Four Pebbles illustrates what a tiny little symbol or something that a child can have as a security blanket can mean to the child. So here's the example in the Four Pebbles. The lady who wrote the book is maybe 94 or 95 years of age, and she still speaks to a lot of groups, and she is a Holocaust survivor. And people often ask her, she was a Holocaust survivor for 6 years. And it was her mother, her father, her brother, and her. And they became separated in the concentration camps. And of course, we all know some of the things that were done to the individuals. But she told the story of how she survived. She collected these little bitty pebbles, 4 pebbles, that were always with her. She could hide them on her person. She could put them under her bed, wherever they had her sleeping. It didn't matter. But the 4 pebbles were reflective. One represented her, her brother, her mother, and her father. And she kept saying to herself over and over in her head that if I keep these 4 pebbles together, someday my family will survive. That's what kept her going. And as a result, she did survive. Her mother, father, brother, they were all reunited. But think about that, a very small kind of thing that she came up with herself that symbolized. So when children want security blankets, when children widgets, when children, find calmness with a certain item, provided it's an appropriate item, let them use it. Consider these relaxation strategies, which is the next slide, which I call our mindful activities. For younger children, certainly blowing bubbles, fidgets. Actually, I will tell you that, I've worked a lot with college students who had to have their fidgets. That was very important. Or they had to have a journal where they were allowed to doodle. They didn't care. Or a journal where they were allowed to draw. They could pay better attention, and it was a wonderful calming activity for them. Or a calming jar where children become anxious, and you just have a number of activities in the calming jar that they can do and go to relieve their stress. Dialogue journals. I don't know how many of you use dialogue journals, but I'm a firm believer in those, provided the children don't have a written expression problem. I would not use a written journal with children who have written expression issues because it's going to cause more stress. However, that same child might like to draw, and they can draw, and then you can respond in writing to the drawing, and they go back, and you go back and forth. Music, and I pulled this because there have been so many wonderful quotes from Ruth Bader Ginsburg about how she dealt with, stress, and how she dealt with what I call all the intellectual clutter that so many people face. And she said, music is the one time when my head isn't filled with briefs and opinions. All that is put on a shelf and I just enjoy. And I can share with you also, I was involved in a survey that we did a few years ago because we were trying to determine what is it, how How did teachers of students with emotional and behavioral disorders survive? You know, what was it that caused them to continue to stay in the field? Because we thought, you know, if we can find this out, maybe we can share this. Obviously, we can share this with other people to help them with their stress. And what we found was and again, it was confidential, so we asked, you know, drugs, either legal or illegal. So we asked a number of questions, but the top answer was they dealt with their stress through music. So we can build a lot of music into the classroom, whether they can listen on headphones. We can teach our math facts with music. Just so many things we can do with music as a stressor for children, and not to just mention music, but for our children who can do art. We do art. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the practice of Zentangle, but Zentangle is just and the beauty of Zentangle, it's like any art. There is no right or wrong answer, like there is in reading and math. So that alone can, you know, calm some children. But with Zentangle, it doesn't matter whether they have motor problems, whatever. You know, it's just a series of lines. And they're not difficult to do, and children can calm themselves through Zentangle. Sensory games like mystery grab bag with various textures, because certain textures will calm some children, other textures will do just the opposite. And the dog who eats your fear, and talking about what is it that relieves your fear. And then having children identify the worries that they can control versus the worries they can't control. So just some more relaxation strategies. For students, obviously, some of the yoga poses are wonderful for children. And always rehearse calming strategies before they are needed. You know, I've had the opportunity over the last, several weeks to work with a number of folks that I see. Once they lose it, they lose it. And if they become very aggressive, the adrenaline is going and the aggression can't stop. And so our best bet is to teach the calming strategies before they're needed, so the person can pull them out of, so to speak, their bag of tricks and utilize them before they're needed. Because the chances are that once the aggression starts and adrenaline kicks in, it's harder to stop the aggression. So, and we talked about Zentangle. So the next thing is flexibility. And that means the ability to be able to move from one task to another. And in the case of a number of our children, to move from one step to another step without becoming upset. So some of us used to use the term perseveration also, because we saw it. I worked for many years with children with autism, and a number of the children with autism would perseverate, do the same thing over and over and over again. Well, part of that was their coping mechanism for not having the ability to be flexible. And the more anxious you are, the less flexible you're going to be, because you're very worried. You're thinking, oh, I'm comfortable doing this, but what if I have to switch to this? I don't want to switch to that because that's the unknown. So what does that mean? We need to build in between steps. And in between steps would be something like, let's say that the students have been at physical education, and they come back in the classroom prior to the coronavirus situation. They come back to the classroom and they're supposed to do mathematics. Oh boy, oh boy. But if we were to build in an in-between step, we might do an exercise that involved math skills. So they're back in the classroom, they've had physical education. We're going to do some activity that involves the previous activity and bridges the gap to the current activity. So I hope that, so as you work with children with anxiety, just always remember that this is going to be tough for them. Switch from one activity to another, and they have to be prepared, and we need to build in those in-between steps. Avoid switching directions. Now, here's the issue. I hope that if you are giving children, let's say, worksheets to do, what I have seen on some worksheets, particularly mathematics, is that I've seen worksheets that have 6 sets of directions on one sheet of paper. Oh, children with anxiety, they can't do it. And what they're doing is, by the time they get to the 6th set of directions, they're still back on doing it, the activity, with the first set of directions, because they don't have that cognitive flexibility. So I always say, like, if you're giving students an assignment to do, and perhaps it's a computerized assignment, it doesn't really matter. Make sure it's one set of directions at a time. And then make sure also the activity, because I'm working right now with enough children that as have gone to a lot more computerized learning, that we're seeing more children with anxiety. And part of it is that switching directions, but part of it is that the children may have fine motor problems, and they're so worried about their fine motor problems they can't actually do the task at hand. Or it may come out that the teacher is giving the directions on how to access the technology, and while the teacher is giving the directions and moving ahead, if they don't stop at each set of directions, the child is getting lost, and therefore the child is putting their head down and saying, I'm not doing anything else. So we have to be very cautious of a number of those things as we're going to more digitized learning. So the avoid switching directions is really very important. The I do, we do, you do together, and you do. A lot of us do, I do, we do, you do. Well, some of our anxiety are probably going to need the extra step in there, which is I do it as the teacher, show you how to do it, then we do it together, and then you with another child or a small group do it. And then the last step in the process is they do it independently. And another one is affirmation journals, where children, can affirm what is going well that day. What are my strengths? What do I have to look forward to? So all of those affirmation statements that we also model for children, and setting goals for every day or setting goals for every half day, but the teacher is always modeling how to do that, so children learn how to set both short-term goals and long-term goals. Visual cues are very important. for children as well. And picture schedules. And a number of people will say, oh, we're not going to do that with high school students. You know, they ought to know how to do this. It's like we've all heard the saying, paint the picture. Well, we do need the picture because people need visual cues. So they need, if the rule is raising the hand, they need to take a photograph of somebody raising the hand so they know what it looks like. Or if the rule is walking in the hall, take a photo of what that looks like. Now you're seeing, you know, all over the place the photos of wearing a mask. So whatever those things look like, people need visual cues. I like to do picture schedules, even with older students, where I post what we're going to be doing. And then once we've done it, I remove it from the schedule so that they see progress and they see exactly, you know, step by step, everything that's going to be done. Structure and routine is really important for children with anxiety, and we need to provide that as much as we can. And we talked about beware of worksheets that change, not only that change directions 6 times on a piece of paper, but I have seen some math sheets where some of the problems go from left to right, and then some of them go from top to bottom. And then some of them are word problems. And for children with issues with cognitive flexibility, that's going to be very difficult for them. And you know, the children can't always tell us those things, but when you're seeing children who are really struggling with some of our assignments, we just have to look at what might be going on with them. That's why I say, you know, it's like detective work. We're really trying to figure out what's going on with the student. And then beware of timers. Now, here's the situation. I love timers. I love timers, especially because children can see the visual. We have 5 minutes left, or we have 10 minutes left, and it doesn't necessarily have the auditory, because well, sometimes the auditory really stresses out a number of children. However, I think we have to be very cautious about timers with children with anxiety, because they see the 5 minutes. I only got 5 minutes left. I only got 5 minutes, 5 minutes. That's all I've got left. And they fixate on that, and they become very anxious at, you know, 5 minutes left to do that. I believe we're probably better off, and I, you know, have been doing it with children where I say, okay, we're going to do 2 more math problems, and maybe 2 more math problems together. Or we're going to read 1 more paragraph, as opposed to saying you have 5 minutes left to do something. So I hope that makes sense. But watch the children with whom you work and see how they respond to some things that we think may not cause anxiety, but in fact, they may very well do that. And then what we know also about children with anxiety is for children who live with chronic stress, they have attentional bias towards survival. And we're thinking, oh my goodness, you know, I've got this activity, and we want our activities to be really engaging for children. But at the same time, we have to remember that some of these children are just concentrating on surviving. We've all heard the, you know, we have to Maslow before we bloom, because we have to meet their basic needs. And in some cases, these children are just worried about survival. And if you're worried about survival, what happens? You have difficulty thinking sequentially. All right, today is Monday, so I have to do, and I have to get up and I have to get dressed and have to grab something to eat. They have a lot of difficulty thinking sequentially. So these may be the children who are going to have trouble getting to school on time because their mind is on a lot of other kinds of things. I think we also have to limit lecture time. Was reading a study that talked about we're expecting children to sit in front of a computer and work for quite a while. And some of our children just can't do that. But we're trying to get all of what they're supposed to be doing done at the same time when some of our children can't focus that long because they have what we call, and a lot of adults have it as well, intellectual clutter. In other words, there's just a lot of stuff in their head, including survival. And so therefore, they're not going to be able to focus for a long period of time. And so any lecture needs to be shorter. So limiting the lecture time and preparation prior to the lecture, notes in advance. That just makes it, I have found with some children who were very anxious and who had and these were high school students, and they had a lot of difficulty paying attention to a lecture in class. But if the teacher was kind enough, as so many are, to let the student have the lecture of the outline ahead of time, it really relieves a lot of stress and anxiety for the student. The other thing, because we want to remember attentional bias, we may want to avoid preferential seating in the front of the room. We all see probably a number of IEPs that say preferential seating, just like extended timelines. Sometimes though extended timelines, if you don't know how to manage your time, it's going to be difficult for you. But with preferential seating, I learned this from working with a number of students that in my early day, I just assumed, that some of the children that needed more attention from me, I would place in the front of the room. However, when you place some children in the front of the room, you've just reduced their visual field of what the other people in the classroom are doing, and they're spending all of their time worried about what's going on behind them. We all know not to come up from behind children, but at the same time, sometimes while we're trying to help by, in fact, saying, okay, you can be in the front of the room and I can give you more individual attention, but at the same time, the children are spending their time worrying, not about whether we're giving them more attention, they're worried about what's going on behind me. Is somebody who is behind me going to hurt me? Is somebody behind me going to make fun of me? So I think we really have to look closely at our use of preferential seating for children who are in survival mode, and for our children who have anxiety, wherever that anxiety is on the spectrum, essentially. I want to close with just saying, because this was actually from a student 12 years of age, I feel worse when others get frustrated with me when my anxiety peaks. But no one is more frustrated than I am with myself for letting this happen again. So just some insight from children who have anxiety. So I want to thank all of you for hanging in there with the technical difficulties, because I do appreciate that. But most importantly, I really want to thank all of you for all of the work that you do with children. You make such an important difference, and I appreciate each and every one of you and wish you a wonderful rest of the conference. Thank you.